Mr. Speaker, I understand that you're unhappy that the tactic that you employed in your legislation to hold state employees hostage to raise a public policy debate has been turned against you by the governor, and that very same tactic has now been used to accomplish having a conversation about items in the budget, policy items and budget items. And I think it's premature for the Legislative Coordinating Commission to hire attorneys when it's my understanding from both you and from the governor on Minnesota Public Radio earlier this morning that you haven't even begun to discuss negotiating the disagreement that you presently have. In your public safety bill, in order to accomplish your objective of inserting a controversial issue into state law, you threatened the very continued funding of the Department of Corrections, the courts, and the Department of Public Safety. Now the governor has used that tactic of unfunding the legislature to raise the discussion on that issue. So if it was okay for you, I don't know why you would think it's not okay for him to use the exact same tactic. In the tax bill, in order to get the special interest tax exemptions, a substantial tax cut for tobacco companies, and a substantial tax cut for commercial and industrial properties that the state can't afford, you, in your state government finance bill, inserted a clause that you would shut down the Department of Revenue and have 1,300 employees out in order to accomplish your objectives. And now that very same tactic has been used against you to raise that issue for public discussion. In the E12 finance bill, in order to push through your version of teacher licensure reform, rather than accommodate the changes that the governor sought, you threatened funding for all of our state school districts and the Department of Education and all those employees who are supported by those expenditures in order to have the discussion on that public policy issue. And what the governor has done by defunding the legislature, he didn't dissolve the legislature, let's not engage in hyperbole. He defunded us. We're perfectly capable of meeting without getting paid. He turned these same exact tactics against you, and now you object to these tactics. They're the ones that you've employed all session, and I would think that you shouldn't be all that surprised that they're being employed by the chief executive that you employed those tactics against.
You know, your comments about language that was put into the state government finance bill being somehow similar to what the governor's doing here. If the governor didn't like what was in the state government finance bill or didn't like what was in the tax bill, he still had his constitutional right to veto those bills. And he chose not to do that. He chose to instead line item veto the funding for the entire legislature, which will not allow us to do our job. I would love to say that all of us legislators are incredibly capable, but we're not going to look very capable if we have no staff backing us up. And our staff is so wonderful, both our partisan and nonpartisan staff, and they do such a great job for us that I think this is just a really unfortunate example of the governor overreaching and trying to use, some political game and tying up all of these, nonpartisan staff and their families into this. Really unfortunate. And frankly, if the governor hadn't personally agreed to all 5 of those things, I think he would have a better argument as to why he was doing this. But he literally personally agreed to every one of those things during the course of negotiations, and now wants to renegotiate and apply leverage by literally taking away all of our staff. This is a blatant example of executive branch overreach and trying to punitively punish what he calls a co-equal branch of government. I'll also add, I was actually moved by the governor's standing up for the legislative branch when the Chief Justice came to us and asked for 3% raises both of the next 2 years for the judges and the staff in the legislative branch. And the governor brought her request fully forward, saying, you know what, she's a separate co-equal branch of government. Those were his words. And it's not my job to question whether or not she needs that money. It's my job to advocate that she understands what she needs. She's asking for it, and we should live up to that. I actually thought that was very moving. I don't know what changed and why the governor doesn't think all of a sudden that the legislature deserves that same kind of respect. But I can only imagine that the answer to that question is tied up in political games. And I think Minnesotans expect better of our governor.
Mr. Speaker.
Representative Hortman.
I can count, so I know I will be outvoted on this premature motion to spend hard-earned taxpayer dollars on litigation when you haven't even tried the cheaper, quicker method of actually talking to the governor to resolve your disputes. But I have to just strongly disagree with your characterization of the factual events. You know, the press conference that you had when you indicated for a second time you were leaving the negotiating table and you were going your own way and you would send the bills whether he liked them or not. The governor was at his cousin's funeral, which you knew. And you indicated to the governor at that time that you would try to work with them, but whether he liked what was in those bills or not, you were sending them. And so the governor had two choices at that point in time, and one was to engage and try to get those bills as good as they could be, and two was to disengage and let you send another batch of bills that were wholly bad. So his engagement is in no way acquiescence to your stepping away from the negotiating table a second time, and he was very clear with you when you did step away from the negotiating table that what he was doing was working to make the best of a situation that you had created. And to now imply to the public that somehow the governor has individually agreed is just wrong. You yourself have indicated publicly on several occasions he never gave you any assurances he was going to sign any of those bills. He maybe in negotiations agreed that you each had gotten to the point where you weren't listening to his commissioners and he had gotten as far as he could get. But you yourself indicated he had never made any assurances to you of what he would sign or veto. So I think that that mischaracterization has to be corrected on the public record. But again, Mr. Speaker, I can count. And I understand that you would rather spend hard-earned taxpayer dollars on litigation than trying to work with the governor. And I think that is unfortunately why we find ourselves here. That at each turn in the legislative session, when there's an opportunity to negotiate and try to find a collaborative solution or to engage and fight and send things to the governor that he disagrees with, you've chosen the option of engaging and fighting. And I think that Minnesotans are tired of that. And they know there's a different way to do this. That there is a possibility of people getting along and having honest give and take and keeping their word that they make to one another and abiding by agreements that they sign. And I think Minnesotans will be disappointed to see their hard-earned taxpayer dollars spent on litigation when no attempt has been made to reach an agreement short of litigation.